whole body and positional information on body fat, lean mass, and bone density. And most people in their 40s should get a DEXA. Then when you get in your 50s, I'd say at least once every couple of years. I actually got 2 DEXAs on the same day. And I did that because as a scientist, I really wanted to know, how much error is there in these measurements? There is some error somewhere in the system. That's a pretty big range for 2 scans in the same day.
When you hear people say, having high body fat is unhealthy, really what they're saying is visceral adipose tissue.
Visceral adipose really seems to be the type of fat that drives a lot of inflammation, a lot of metabolic dysfunction. You can have people who are relatively lean, but who have relatively high amounts of visceral adipose and are at higher risk for diabetes and other diseases. And so you have a background as a weightlifter. What would you tell me if you were my coach? My name is Matt Caberline, and welcome to the Optispan YouTube channel. Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan podcast. I'm joined again by my colleague, Nick Arapis, and today we're gonna take a little bit of a deeper dive into DEXA. So DEXA stands for dual X-ray absorptiometry, and it is really the gold standard method for assessing body composition, and we use it pretty extensively here at Optispan. So if you haven't had a chance yet to check out our recent episode on body composition, I'd suggest that you do that. We got into DEXA a little bit there. Today, we're gonna actually take a look at our own DEXA reports. So Nick and I have both had a series of DEXAs over the last several years and go through those and then actually do some sort of case reports where we talk about some of the different patterns that we see in different types of people and how we think about that at Optispan.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this episode. Since I've joined, we've been talking about doing it, and DEXA really has probably been the biggest game changer back when I was a personal trainer and kind of a solo health coach. Before that, you kind of use more subjective measurements. You kind of look at them, maybe tape measurement. This makes it a lot more objective, and it can also help have harder numbers that you can use to set future goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably worth starting with just a very quick review of what DEXA is, what it measures, how it works. So DEXA stands for, as I mentioned, dual X-ray absorptiometry. So it uses a low energy X-ray. It's probably about the same amount of radiation you'd get on a flight from Seattle to California. So really not anything to be worried about. Wouldn't do it every day, but once every 3 months or once a year, nothing to really be concerned about. And the way the device works, it's actually pretty cool. It's kind of like a scanner where you have an emitter and a detector, and it scans over your body. You just lay in it for about 10 minutes. And what that does is it allows you to quantify the amount of fat and bone density in particular, regionally throughout your entire body, and then indirectly calculate lean mass or muscle mass. And so what you get out of that is whole body and positional information on body fat, lean mass, and bone density. And so as we go through our reports today, we'll kind of take a look at each of those things and talk about how you interpret it.
Yeah, so wanted to add one way I'll use it is, Body Spec, they have an option where you can buy 2 at once. You save a little bit of money. So, I'll have a client do DEXA, and their second one, I'll have them already scheduled 6 to 12 months later. And with me, the mentality is almost like you're back in college and you have an exam coming up. You study a little bit harder.
So like set a goal or encourages you to work a little bit harder to hit the mark. Okay, that makes sense.
Knowing that date is coming up. So that's one way I'll use it. You kind of get that before and after.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Body Spec. Probably worth just mentioning, all the data we're going to show you today came off of Body Spec scans. So Body Spec is company based out of Austin that I think they were really the first to popularize the idea of mobile DEXAs. So they put DEXA machines in the back of Sprinter vans. And so the 3 DEXAs that I'm going to talk about today of my own were all done in the Sprinter vans. We now have a Body Spec device and location here at Optispan headquarters. So going forward, all of our DEXAs will be on a brick and mortar site. But Body Spec is just one of several companies that offer these whole body DEXAs. Again, probably worth just mentioning before we get too far into this that the types of DEXAs we're going to be talking about today are different from the historical clinical use of DEXA, which was really primarily to diagnose osteopenia and osteoporosis. So for any of you who've ever had like a bone density DEXA scan, that's probably, you probably didn't get a report on body fat or muscle mass or really any positional information outside of, spine and hips, which is usually where the bone density DEXAs look. And that's because those are the locations of most fractures that people experience. And so it's just worth appreciating the difference. And as we'll talk about, I think, you probably don't want to use a whole body composition DEXA as a replacement for a dedicated bone density scan to diagnose osteopenia or osteoporosis. Those are going to be probably more specific and more quantitative if you actually go get a dedicated scan for that.
All right. So Matt, let's go over your DEXA. So on screen, I have your December DEXA of 2022, and then your May DEXA of 2023, and quite a big difference.
Yeah.
So let's start with body fat percent.
Yeah, actually, let's take a minute and just mention that on the December 2nd, 2022 DEXA, I actually got 2 DEXAs on the same day. They were about an hour and a half apart. So we actually had the body spec van out to the office here, and I was able to convince Chloe, who is my favorite body spec DEXA technician, to give me 2 DEXA scans on the same day. And I did that because as a scientist, I really wanted to know, how much error is there in these measurements. So as we're going through the different parameters, we can actually take a look and see on the same day, measurements that should be identical, how much noise is there in the system. And I actually think that's going to be important, particularly when we get to the visceral adipose measurements. We'll see, that there is some variation just within the system.
Yeah, so starting with body fat percent, so you were 21.4 and 21.3, and that was on the same day.
Right, so those should have been the same, so that's pretty close.
Mm-hmm. So I assume you take the 21.3 as the accurate one.
It really didn't make a difference. So it's kind of funny because going in, I had a few months before that gotten one of these impedance scales, and the scale kept telling me that I was like at 14 or 15% body fat. I didn't really believe it, but it was nice to hear. And then I get in the van and I'm talking to Chloe, and I'm like, well, you do this all the time. You must be really good at. Must be able to look at somebody and see what their percent body fat was. And so she didn't really want to do it, but I forced her to take a guess on me, and I think she guessed like 26 or 27%. I was like, come on, Chloe,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
So it turns out the real number's somewhere in the middle. So my impedance scale was off by quite a bit, as was Chloe, as it turns out. And I actually, looking at this number now, and given what I know now about body composition, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's right where it should have been, and the DEXA was accurate, which is good. Interestingly, probably most of my adult life, I spent 5 to 10 pounds heavier than this. I'm guessing and I don't think I was any stronger. If anything, I probably had lower lean mass. So I'm guessing I probably spent most of my adult life in the mid-20s for percent body fat. So I was actually relatively happy with this number. And if we look at the percentile chart, that put me in the 50 to 59-year-old age range. So I was 51 at the time of that first DEXA. For men, right around the 21st, 22nd percentile. So not a bad place to start.
Yeah, and then looking at your May, so about 5 months later, about 5.5 months, you were 14.3, so that's a 7% loss.
Yeah, so a big change in body composition, and not just body fat, but lean mass as well. So, and I think I didn't really change a lot in in fact, I don't think I changed anything in my exercise routine. I think the 3 things that I really changed between December 2022 and May 2023 was I increased the amount of protein in my diet. So prior to that, I hadn't really been tracking macros. I'd played around a bit with a ketogenic diet. This must have been like early 2020 because it was just before COVID-19. And then, kept a pretty low carb diet from that point on. In fact, I still eat a relatively low carb diet, at least low in simple sugars, but I hadn't really tracked macros other than that. And I made a dedicated sort of effort to increase the amount of protein in my diet around the time of that first DEXA. Also started taking creatine around that time. And I think probably the biggest lifestyle change was basically cut alcohol out almost completely. And so I don't know if it was, one of those 3 things or probably a combination of those 3 things. But I was very pleased with the change in body composition between December and May.
And you've pretty much maintained that since then. It's been over a year, right?
Yeah. That's right. I
2022.
think all of those things I've continued since then. Yeah.
Great. So there's two types of fat on the report. So the next one is the visceral adipose tissue, abbreviated VAT or VAT.
Right.
So that one, again, you have the two numbers from the same day. So we want to talk about that.
Yeah. So first of all, it's worth mentioning visceral adipose tissue and why that's important. So you can break fat in your body, roughly into two buckets, right? There's subcutaneous fat, which is the fat kind of under your skin. And then there's the visceral adipose, which is the fat surrounding your organs and just below the abdominal wall. And the reason why we break those out is because visceral adipose really seems to be the type of fat that drives a lot of inflammation, a lot of metabolic dysfunction. And so you really want to get the visceral adipose down as low as possible. I mean, optimally it'd be at 0, but I think that the number, that usually gets thrown around is you want about less than a pound of visceral adipose.
So when you hear people say, having high body fat is unhealthy, really what they're saying is high visceral adipose tissue.
I think it's probably visceral adipose that really drive a lot of the metabolic problems. And in fact, you can have people who are relatively lean, meaning their total body fat percentage can be pretty low, but who have relatively high amounts of visceral adipose and are at higher risk for diabetes and other diseases. And so I think it is the visceral adipose that you primarily want to pay attention to, but I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that having a very high percent body fat and low visceral adipose has no risks associated with it.
One that comes to mind could be just the joint strain over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go look at your visceral. So the one you did twice in one day, you had a 0, and then you also had about a half a pound, so 0.43 pounds.
Yeah, so it's worth saying both of those are low, but it's also a pretty big difference, right? Going from 0 pounds of visceral adipose to almost half a pound of visceral adipose. I really don't know what to make of this, other than, it clearly says that there is some error somewhere in the system, whether it's in the scan itself or the software that's used to interpret the scan. But that's a pretty big range, a half a pound almost, for 2 scans in the same day. So I think it's just worth knowing that, maybe what the result you get back is plus or minus half a pound.
And your most recent DEXA was half a pound, I think?
0.77. Yeah.
So
okay. Even higher. So yeah, again, my guess is the true value is somewhere in the middle. Like maybe that 0.43 is about right. Mm-hmm. And the first one on the December date was low, and the one on the May 23 scan was maybe a little higher. It is, I think, a little bit unexpected that I would go from, let's just say the 0.4 value in December was the true value, that I would go up in visceral adipose at the same time that there was almost a 10-pound decrease in total body weight and a 7% increase in body fat. So I don't know what to attribute that to, other than there's some noise in the system.
Yeah, and your A and G ratio, which is your waist to hip ratio, went down about 50%.
Which you would expect to be correlated with visceral adipose. And
exactly.
In this case, again, it may be that once you get below a pound, there's just a lot of error there, and it's hard to resolve those smaller amounts. I just don't know.
Yep, so below a pound, you're probably good.
Yeah.
So from there, we can go into bone mineral density. So your Z-score was 2.9 on the first scan, which is the 2 on the same day, and then 2.8 on the following May scan.
Yeah, so again, worth defining what we mean when we're talking about Z-score. So Z-score, so bone density will almost always be presented in this way, as a Z-score and then as a percentile sometimes. So Z-score is just a statistical measurement, and what that refers to is the number of standard deviations. So if you look across the entire population, you can calculate a mean and then standard deviations for the distribution. Z-score is the number of standard deviations away from the population mean that you are as an individual. So a positive Z-score means you have a higher bone density than the average of the population, and a Z-score of 1 would be 1 standard deviation above. A negative Z-score means you have a lower bone density than the average of the population. And so that's the way you'll usually see bone density reported. The other metric that they give is something called a T-score. So the Z-score is going to be age matched. The T-score is going to be normalized to the population at 30 years old. And so the T-score is used primarily as a diagnostic tool for osteopenia or osteoporosis. So the way that's done is your bone density value is compared to a typical population of 30-year-olds, that would be different for men and women. And then if it is between -1 and -2.5, so less than 1 to 2.5 standard deviations, less than average, that's diagnostic for osteopenia. If it's lower, more negative than 2.5, that is diagnostic for osteoporosis. And again, usually that will be done specifically for the spine and the hips. And that's how these bone density DEXAs are used to diagnose osteopenia or osteoporosis.
Yeah, so according to this report, you are really far from osteoporosis.
Almost 3 standard deviations above the mean. So that's a good place to be. As this, it's sort of interesting to look. So body spec will give you the positional absolute bone density in grams per centimeter square, but they don't give you T or Z scores for the positional data for head, arms, legs, trunk, ribs, spine, and pelvis. And again, spine and pelvis is typically where you would look to diagnose osteopenia, osteoporosis. They give you the whole body Z score. If you look at my case, it's kind of funny. My high bone density is actually skewed by the head, so proof positive that I have a thick skull. And I think you need to be a little bit careful with the whole body bone density scores and not use them the same way you might use a dedicated bone density DEXA.
Yeah, and looking at mine real quick is, I have 3.3, for example, my
Yeah.
T-score and Z-score, which are the same, and I'm about the same age as this. But my head, I have actually a lot less bone mineral density than you, even though my total number is higher. So
this also points to an observation that we've made, which is that the likelihood that both of us would be 3 standard deviations above the mean just by random chance is probably like 1 in 100,000, right? And I know 2 other people who have Z scores close to 3 based on body spec DEXAs, and 1 other person. And so it makes us think that the population comparison here might be really important. So I believe that the Z scores that body spec is using are based on a large longitudinal study across the United States called NHANES. It's kind of the classic study that people go back to for these sort of percentile charts. What this probably suggests is that the body spec population is different from the NHANES population. And this is actually something that's worth, I think, exploring further to figure out, these very high Z scores that seem to come out of the body spec data set. What does that actually mean in terms of the absolute bone density values and diagnosing osteopenia and osteoporosis? So I think that's TBD. We may come back to that. But again, this just reinforces my caution that you probably don't want to use the body spec bone density data as a surrogate for a true bone density DEXA to diagnose osteopenia and osteoporosis. My rule of thumb might even be if you have a negative value, that would be worth going and getting a diagnostic bone density scan.
All right, so moving on from bone density, next is different ways of kind of measuring and looking at how much muscle you have on your body. So one of those that you see here is just your total lean mass. We also have, the body spec, they give you the report builder that has FFMI, which is sometimes called BMI lean. And then there's ALMI. So
right. FFMI is fat-free mass index. ALMI is appendicular lean mass index. Both of these are metrics that are commonly used to sort of assess, whether somebody is adequately muscled or under-muscled, right? And I think you've used it quite a bit in your experience as a coach.
Yeah, so ALMI, they can actually use to diagnose sarcopenia. So in women, if you're less than 5.5, and men if you're less than 7. So we'll kind of go over some examples of where we are and where other people are. Usually, like body spec, they'll give you the ALMI. Some reports they don't, but you'll have the raw data. So you can look at how much muscle you have in your arms and legs.
Yeah.
So that formula would be, you take the skeletal muscle mass in your arms, you add it to your legs, convert it to kilograms, and you divide it by your height in meters squared.
Right. And so like you said, this is based on the BMI calculation. This is a height normalized assessment of musculature.
Yep, exactly. So usually they correlate. I see a lot of people, their ALMI, let's look at yours, for example. So your FFMI, you were in the 89th percentile with your most recent scan, the one back in May. And your ALMI, you were in the 85th percentile. So they're pretty close, within 4%.
Right.
And usually when they are further apart, I've always kind of heard to lean more on the ALMI as the one being closer to the truth because it's a bit more of a pure.
Yeah, and so again, ALMI is going to be arms and legs primarily driving it, and so what you no longer have in there is the organs, which would be in the FFMI as part of the fat-free mass.
Exactly, because it's lean mass, so it would get picked up by that. Yeah, so overall, your made DEXA, it's impressive.
So what would you tell me if you were my coach?
To maintain this for the next 40 years?
The rest of my life?
Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's go into my DEXA now, so we have this as well. So this was actually on my 32nd birthday. I had a close friend named DJ who's, I know, watching right now. He bought this for me as a birthday present, so I went to a van, stripped down in my underwear, did the DEXA. My plan was to do it annually. So this is back, I was paying for it. I wanted to make sure I do it at least once a year. And I thought, okay, my birthday, I'll remember to do it on my birthday.
And this was done when? What was the date?
August 17th, 2023. Okay. So about, 7 months ago or so.
Okay. And you said your first DEXA was back in 2015?
Yeah, so I did one at Pro Club when I first joined. Pretty similar. I think the only difference was I had a little bit more muscle. I was coming right out of college. And I had slightly more bone density.
So was this the second DEXA?
This was my second DEXA. So I had a pretty big gap between the two. And now we're doing them a lot more frequently.
Yep. Okay.
So let's kind of going over some takeaways. So my body fat was 13.6%, which I actually have a photo we can put up on screen. I was going for 10%. I've always wanted to get sub 10, just kind of ego, just like a personal goal. So I was actually a little bit disappointed when I saw the 13.6. And the way the report's laid out, that's the first thing you see. And so I started with disappointment, but then as I dug deeper into the into the report, I was pretty happy with what else came up. So visceral adipose tissue, this one just said 0. I've had, similar to you, I've had tests since then that gave me 0.5 about. So I don't know which, under 1, like you said. So I'm feeling good about that. Bone density 3.3. So again, top 1%. Not any risk for osteopenia. So I'm pretty happy about that. Body weight is 202. FFMI and ALMI are both about the 95th percentile, which is exactly where I want to be. So someone like myself I feel like I have plenty of muscle for longevity. I kind of want to get my VO2 max up.
Yeah.
And some other
and we'll go into deep dives on VO2 max in future episodes as well. Yeah. And I mean, I think this is actually worth taking a minute to comment on. So you have a background as a weightlifter, right, in college and built a pretty solid musculature, right? And so you're at a point now where going forward, maintaining that adequate musculature is important, but it's kind of up to you, but you don't necessarily need to gain more muscle in the future, right? Yeah. Whereas I think, and this is just important to point out that everybody's goals are going to be different, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty fortunate that the sports I chose to pick when I was a teenager in college happened to be ones that are great for bone density. So in high school, I was a long jumper and triple jumper. So ballistic jumping movements are one of the best ways to improve kind of that force on your bones. And then I was a power lifter all through college, pretty much my entire 20s. And then they know, those heavy compound axial loaded movements are best for bone density. So I think that kind of speaks to why I got this 3.3.
Yeah, and there's certainly a genetic component as well, right? So it's a little bit hard to know how much of the bone density is genetic versus lifestyle. But I think the important point there is that lifestyle can play a big role in terms of at least maintaining bone density going forward. And so that's partly why, I sort of suggest that most people, I really would say most people in their 40s should get a DEXA. Find out early if you're on the path to osteopenia or osteoporosis. Also, I think a pretty good motivational tool, at least for some people. But then when you get in your 50s, I'd say at least once every couple of years, because there's a lot you can do in terms of lifestyle. Even if your genetics make you prone to low bone density, there's a lot you can do in terms of lifestyle, diet, resistance training that can have a big impact on keeping you from developing osteopenia or osteoporosis.
Yeah. And on top of that, making sure you don't have any nutrient deficiencies like calcium, magnesium.
Yep, absolutely.
So one thing I like to do is I have measurements going back to 2007 to when I was 15 years old. So I've got a lot of, photos and tape measurements, whatever it is. I don't want to do a DEXA all the time, just at the time financially. And so that same day I took a photo. So this was in my garage working out with my buddy, Aaron. So that was the same day I did the DEXA, and I also took my body weight. I did my waist measurement, my neck, my legs, my arms. And so in the future, it was 3 months later, if I want to see how close I am to that 13.6%, I can kind of correlate it with what these measurements are and how I look in the mirror. So a bit of subjective measurement as well. That's something I recommend for people. So both of us, we've scheduled DEXAs for June. So what are your goals for this June DEXA?
Yeah, so we're not going to show it today, but we actually got DEXAs about 5 or 6 weeks ago. So okay, so yeah, we're not going to show it today, but we actually both got DEXAs about 6 weeks ago, and we've got another one scheduled in June. And so we'll just give a little teaser. We were each a little bit disappointed, I think, in in those DEXAs, but yeah, so we're looking forward to see what we get in June. What are my goals? I don't know. I mean, I think I would, I don't know if I'll actually get there. Maybe I shouldn't say it or maybe I should. Maybe it'll be motivation.
I think it'd be fun if we both just set our goals and then we held it.
I think I'd kind of like to get to single digits for once in my life for percent body fat. But I want to do that without sacrificing lean mass or bone density. So, that might be a little too aggressive to get there by June. I haven't actually done the calculation to try to figure out where would my body weight need to get to if I was able to preserve lean mass to get down to 9.99.
Yeah.
Right. That's my goal.
We didn't talk about this beforehand, but that's my exact same goal as well.
Okay.
It was back in my August DEXA as well. So I did the math, and for me, I had to be like 198. Right now, I'm about 208, so about 10 pounds.
Oh, that's not so much.
Yeah, and that's assuming I lose pretty much all fat.
Right.
Maybe 1 pound of lean mass. So let's do it.
Right. Yeah. All right. We'll see where we land.
All right. So let's go into our other kind of case samples or scenarios. So all these names have been changed from the actual people, but these are people that we've coached or we personally know. And so first up, we got Brian. And so Brian's a good example of someone who I would say is overnourished but adequately muscled. So I don't know. Do you have any takeaways just by looking at his scan here of what stands out?
Yeah, so I mean, percent body fat at 30, almost 31%, that puts him in the 80th percentile, right? So I mean, I think that's again the bottom line number that most people are going to look at. So I think clearly an opportunity there to reduce percent body fat, but maybe even more importantly is the visceral adipose, which is pushing 4 pounds, right? So we talked earlier about how you really want to keep that below 1 pound. So I think that's the thing that jumps out, right? That's probably where you want to focus your effort, is to bring down the visceral adipose in particular. The bone density score being high is nice, because then one of the things you worry about when somebody goes on a significant reduction in calories to lose fat is that you're going to lose lean mass and bone density. Starting from a higher bone density reduces the concern you would have about loss of bone density. So reducing bone density is what you might be concerned about when you're undergoing a caloric deficit.
Yeah, you're in sort of a catabolic state, so you're breaking things down. So you kind of want
and
to
I mean,
careful.
even in mine, it's hard to know whether it's a statistically significant change, but I have seen a decline in bone density on each of my DEXAs since December 2022. Not a big drop, like 0.1 each time, but I think if that trend continues, that would be something to pay attention to. And that may have to do with the fact that I've also lost weight over that time period.
My guess is it'll plateau now that you're kind of reached your weight. So from a coaching point of view, Brian's relatively easy to coach, because we can kind of be relatively aggressive with getting that visceral adipose tissue down, getting the A to G ratio, the body fat. So really trying to lose body fat.
Yeah.
And if we lose a little bit of bone density, a little bit of muscle, not the end of the world. Ideally, I'm going to tell him and coach him on getting enough protein, trying to maintain that.
I think the other thing that's interesting here is the difference between FFMI and ALMI, right? So 97th percentile FFMI, 75th percentile ALMI. This gets back to what you alluded to earlier, which is that, rule of thumb is you kind of weight the ALMI more if there's a discrepancy between the two.
Yes, because he does have a lot of just mass, so he'll have a lot of lean mass as well. So
yep,
the 75th is definitely closer to the truth. So next,
the other thing that might be worth mentioning is, body spec will give you this resting metabolic rate calculation. I think like you would get from your Apple Watch or other wearables, I think you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Like, I think it can be useful to give you a rough estimate of what your resting metabolic rate is if you want to try to calculate out like calories. You're going to add resting metabolic rate to active calories burned to get your total caloric consumption, but it's not I'm guessing it's not really that precise.
Yeah, you don't really know until you track your food for a week, eat that, and see, did you gain weight or did you lose weight?
Right, yeah.
So. All right, next up we have Autum. This is someone who I would categorize as under-muscled. And so she is super active. She's in her 60s, early 60s. She's been active her entire life. Um, I've been trying to get, as I was a personal trainer for about 5 years before we did this DEXA and went into more of the Healthspan style coaching. And I was always trying to get her to gain just a little bit of muscle.
Yeah.
And the analogy would be just having how we save money for retirement. I just wanted her to have more muscle for older age.
Right.
So in the
Right.
bank account in case it drops, with gravity and kind of naturally. Any takeaways from her scans?
Yeah, I think the 22% body fat, especially for a 60-year-old female, is quite low. That puts her at the 10th percentile, which most people would think is great, right? But when that's paired with a low lean mass, that actually can be problematic. And so I think this is what you were getting at, where she doesn't really need to worry about the body fat percentage, and the emphasis here should be really on trying to build muscle.
Which is something like again for 5 years I was trying to get her to do, and the DEXA got her to do it. So since then, this is about a half a year ago, she has put on some muscle.
That's great.
And so getting that, like I mentioned earlier, getting that objective data helps.
And what are the tips that you would typically give to one of your clients in this category, right? For building muscle, like how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, big picture is definitely just adding protein. So for her, we settled around 1 gram per pound of body weight.
She was already doing resistance training.
She was already doing resistance training, but we added a day. So we aimed for train every muscle twice a week, around 10 to 20 total sets per week. And so we took out a little bit of her cardio, which she has not listed here, but she had a really elite VO2 max. We're able to sacrifice that just a little bit and then get this muscle on her.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I actually think, this is a not uncommon phenotype, particularly among some of the high achievers in fitness, right? Who have spent, many years being very active, go to the gym all the time, and end up actually pushing it a little too far towards low body fat and become a little bit under muscled.
Yep. Which is important to look at the big picture and try to get everything balanced out. So next up we have Angela, which is someone I believe you personally know. And so kind of a boring scan, which is good. Sometimes boring is kind of like middle of the, park, but it's boring, but there's still things we want to optimize. So with her ALMI 65th, I would love to see that around 75th, but there's only a few pounds of building muscle. Her VAT, again, around 1.02. So if possible, getting that down below a pound would be great, closer to 0. And then her A and G ratio is right at 1. We'd like to see that under 1. And so again, if she got that visceral adipose tissue, her body fat down, that'll naturally drop below 1.
Right. So this is a case where I think it's interesting to both compare men and women, and also the distribution of visceral adipose, right? So we talked about Brian, who had a percent body fat of about 31%, so same as Angela. But for percentile, it put him at a much higher percentile because women tend to have a higher percent body fat. But also for visceral adipose, I think he had almost 4 pounds of visceral adipose compared to Angela's slightly over 1 pound, right? And so again, you look at those two people, and in particular, their risk of metabolic disease very differently. Somebody who's got almost 4 pounds of visceral adipose is going to be at a much higher risk of things like diabetes or metabolic problems than somebody like Angela, who's closer to a pound of visceral adipose.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add with Angela is, which we'll go into next episode, is she did this DEXA and also the bone-specific diagnostic DEXA around the same time, so we can compare those two and see how they add up.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we should sort of summarize DEXA. How does it fit into Optispan? How should it fit into the viewers, their sort of Healthspan routine?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I think about DEXA is, we already talked about the specific things that you can assess, quantify, that are probably most relevant for health. Bone density, super important, especially finding out early if you're on a trajectory to osteopenia or osteoporosis. Visceral adipose, also, I think, a very solid indicator of likelihood of developing metabolic disease, chronic inflammatory conditions, and it gives us a target that we can assess how the lifestyle interventions or other interventions that are being used are kind of moving the needle. And lean mass. So again, we didn't really talk about it in the context of metabolic function, but having sufficient muscle mass is also, in addition to low visceral adipose, very important for optimal metabolic function. And so it's important functionally for being able to move around and do what you want to do, but it's also important for metabolic regulation. And so making sure that people have adequate muscle mass is really important. And so we use it as a tool in combination with other biomarkers for trying to get an overall sort of systems view of each individual. I think the important thing to recognize, though, is that DEXA in and of itself is only one tool, and it's not going to be a perfect proxy of health.
Yeah, it doesn't incorporate like A1C or blood pressure or other things like that. So
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's worth noting is you could look great by DEXA, and you could put a continuous glucose monitor on and find out that indeed you're on the path to prediabetes or diabetes. So there are going to always be individuals who don't completely fit the pattern, and that's why we need to have multiple modalities of information to really get a holistic picture of an individual's health. The other thing about DEXA, though, that's great is I think for a lot of people it can be a motivational tool. It certainly has been for me.
yeah, same here. So we'll do another episode in June, going over it. Let's see if we get our sub 10% goals. We kind of hold each other accountable. Go over sort of the kind of weirder cases, we'd call it. So the bone density. My best friend's my same height. We've been workout buddies for years, but there's some interesting comparisons with our DEXA and stuff we kind of intuitively know.
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of fun to go into.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
All right, so thank you for watching this episode of the Optispan podcast. We got new episodes every week. Please like and subscribe to help support the channel and spread the word.